Okay, welcome everybody to the second session of NIBRS Week. I'm Susan Howley. I'm a project director here at the Justice Research and Statistics Association. We are really pleased to see many of you here, and especially those of you who are back after session 1 on Tuesday, which I feel like went really well. I personally got a whole lot out of it. I hope you did too. We are really grateful for BJS staff and RTI staff for sharing information with us. So I'm going to restate the idea for these sessions really came out of a suggestion by two SAC directors, Derek Wietenheimer in Wisconsin and Stephanie Howard in Georgia, who noted that a lot of folks have been operating on their own or in their own state, not able to capitalize on the experience of others who are also working with NIBRS data. We also realize that we've been missing out on some of the learning that's been happening at the national level and the broader efforts to work with NIBRS data. At the end of today's meeting, Stephanie Howard will jump in and say a little bit more about this. But today we are grateful to have Alexia Cooper from BJS and Marcus Brzozowski of RTI, who are going to share what they have been learning and some insights that they're developing. As with Tuesday's session, because we have such a large number of people on this meeting, for bandwidth and attention purposes, I will ask you, if you're not presenting or speaking, to keep your cameras off and your microphone muted. Please do make use of the chat function to ask questions or offer comment at any time. We will be keeping track of that and we'll be referring to it during the session here, and we'll make sure that we capture all of that. If you would like to ask your question out loud, type into chat, "I have a question," and we will call on you. At that point, please turn your camera on and unmute yourself. And so one more thing to add to the networking feel of this gathering, for those of you who have not already done so, I would ask you to update your name to add your state or your organization if you're with like a national organization and not state-based. So if you put your cursor on the square with your initials, you'll see 3 dots pop up. If you click on that, it'll give you an opportunity to edit your name. And so you can see that for myself, I've added in JRSA. And you can see by looking at the participant list, a lot of people from earlier sessions added their organization or their state. So please do that. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Alexia and Marcus.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I know Marcus and I are both thrilled to be able to talk with you guys today. This is a really important project that we're working on. It's one we're very excited about, and we're excited to be able to share the information out. And so I will go ahead and get us started. Today, this session is going to be talking about the National Crime Statistics Exchange National Incident-Based Reporting, or NIBRS, estimation project specifically. We use the acronym because we're government and therefore love acronyms, NNEP, for this particular project, although sometimes I'll slip up and I'll probably call it the NCSX Estimation Project. Marcus, do you want to go to the next slide?
There we go.
So to give you guys a little bit of background, the NCSX NIBRS Estimation Project was born out of the need to start identifying new ways to use NIBRS data and to create national estimates. As many of you, I hope most of you are aware, beginning on January of last year, the FBI stopped accepting crime data submitted in the summary format. And at this point, only crime data submitted using the NIBRS format is acceptable. But this created something of a conflict because all of the estimation procedures that were used to provide data to the public were based on summary.
I'm sorry, Alexia, I'm going to cut in for just a moment and remind everyone to please mute yourself. I know a lot of us are participating on our lunch hours, and so we don't want to hear anybody's lunch or anybody's typing. So if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Thanks.
It might be Marcus too, since he's got his up for his.
You're throwing me under the bus. I love
it. Hey, it would be just like every other day. No, I appreciate that. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So at the broad level, the NCSX exchange was intended to serve two major purposes related to this change from summary to incident-based statistics. And the higher level project was designed to support states and a sample of law enforcement agencies to transition to NIBRS compliant reporting systems. Before all of these projects began, very few across the nation agencies or states were able to accept all of these data. And it was a pretty large lift in order to start making this transition. So the NCSX project was designed to sort of give a starting point for this transition. And the second piece, which is what we'll be talking about mostly today, was to find a way to develop the methodologies and procedures by which we could use these data to produce representative national, regional, and state level crime estimates. We can go to the next slide, Marcus. So what we'll be doing today between Marcus and myself is we're going to give you guys an overview of what the system is that we're going to be using to do estimation. We'll talk about the impact that the coverage of the NIBRS data makes on producing estimates. More or less, we have to consider, if not everyone is reporting, how could this affect the national estimates, the state estimates we want to be able to produce?
The only question I have is what we're trying is, I think it's a decent question the way it's presented, as long as it's doing what we're looking for it to do.
I'm going to mute everyone. Speakers, you may unmute yourselves.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. The joy of working from home and doing teleconferences. It's just part of the deal, but we'll go ahead and continue on. The other thing we're going to talk about is we'll talk about the key components of the system that we've designed and the processes and procedures that have been in development to give you guys an understanding of kind of what our thinking was from the start to finish, where we're going with it. We'll also discuss the indicators or crime measures, as a lot of us would call them, that we're intending to start with in this estimation process and why we picked some of these and what they're going to be representing. We'll talk a little bit about the data quality production and discussions we've had and what data quality checks and reviews are part of the process we're using. And then we'll go to a little bit more hardcore math related stuff, and we'll talk about the data editing and imputation rules that we're going to be using, because the data aren't complete. And from a national representation standpoint, we want to make sure that we're using the best data possible in order to make these estimates so that they're as representative and as good as we can possibly make them. Next slide, Marcus. Probably should have put this one first, but as Susan said, just to let you know, Marcus is the person who'll be giving most of the detailed talk today. Marcus Brasovsky is a senior statistician with RTI International, who's our primary contractor on this project. He has been the PI on the NCSX NIBRS Estimation Project for the last 4 or 5 years, basically since the project's inception. And he has a huge amount of experience working with surveys, related studies, imputation, national data, and now working with NIBRS and large-scale NIBRS imputation projects with us. My name is Alexia Cooper, and I am the unit chief of the law enforcement unit with the Bureau of Justice Statistics. I have been up until last week. I was the primary project manager for the NCSX NIBRS Estimation Project, and I have been with the NCSX project since its beginning about 8 years ago. And I have about 15 years of experience conducting research with data collection in criminal justice related to juveniles, vulnerable populations, and working with NIBRS data. So it's a real privilege for us to be able to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you have as we continue. Next slide. So as Susan said at the beginning, if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat. If the question is something we can answer immediately, we'll do that because we want to make sure that this is as interactive and as valuable for you guys as we can. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and log it until the end of the presentation and then answer those questions and have the discussion at that point. We are expecting the presentation will be about 45 minutes long total, which will give us another 30 to 45 minutes for questions and discussion. So we're really hoping that you guys will approach this with questions, with thoughts. We want to hear what you guys think about everything we're doing, and we want to hear about what you guys are doing. Next slide.
Yeah, well, and Alex, I'll just chime in here.
Real quick. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, So two quick points on here. So one, Alexia, since during the presentation, if you don't mind monitoring the chat and just letting me know if there's a question that we probably should answer right then and there. I appreciate that. Thank you. And two, yeah, so this presentation will be a little more, there's no formulas, I promise that, but it is a little more in the weeds of statistics. So right, I definitely don't know what level everyone's at or want, so feel free to ask questions right there, and I want everyone to understand what's going on, and that's sort of the point of having all this. So please ask questions. I'm happy to better explain things if the slide itself doesn't do a good job. So please feel free to chime in and ask questions at any point. Okay.
Great point. Thanks, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the objectives and accomplishments and the schedule, we'll go on to the next piece. So to give you guys an idea of what our estimation project objectives were, from a very high level, we had a set of objectives that were designed around determining what crime measures or indicators we wanted to be able to produce using the NIBRS data, because as many of you know, the NIBRS data is extraordinarily complicated. There are a lot of variables in there, and it's really, really easy to get really detailed really fast with all the possible things that you could do with it. And so we had a lot of thoughts and did a lot of work to try to determine not just what was important to use for these measures, but also which ones could be done with accuracy and reliability. There's certainly interest in having five-way crosses of various things, but there has to be a question of, is it actually viable? And so we had to do a lot of work on that area. We also wanted to do work looking at population served estimates. Right now, with the data that we've had in the past, with the summary data, we have been able with the FBI to produce high-level estimates of crime. We can say how many rapes occur and the rate of rape, but we can't give you information, for example, on the number of juvenile females or juvenile males that were sexually assaulted that come to the attention of law enforcement. And that is what this project and NIBRS will allow us to do. But that meant we had to find a way to develop population served information that would let us split that by those demographic characteristics like age, sex, and race, which had never been done with these kinds of data at the FBI level or the national level before. And then the last main objective we had was actually to produce the estimates. And I know it seems a little bit odd to have that as a major component on this when, of course, it's called the estimation project. But the reason we have that where we do is it's important to think about this as sort of climbing up a hill. Every single step along the way has been things we had to examine and consider that built upon themselves to get to where we want to go, which is these estimates. And so a lot of what I want you guys to think about as we're going through and with the questions you have is sort of all of these pieces are just that. They're puzzle pieces we had to fit together. And so the very last one is actually producing the estimates themselves. We had some secondary objectives. These are things that we were investigating for possibility, and many of them we'll be able to do, but we might not be able to do all of them either because of data quality reasons or because we don't have enough data yet. And these are things we've investigated, and we'll talk a little bit more later about where these investigations have gone, but these include making sub-national estimates. This includes the most common one people will know will be the state level estimates, but we're also looking in the long term at the feasibility of doing other types of sub-national estimates. And we wanted to look at population served estimates for agencies and jurisdictions that are not your classic local or county level. We're interested in these zero pop or special district agencies. The most common which that most of you would probably think of would be school districts or universities. Many, many universities have police departments that handle crime, but technically they do not have, under the FBI's standard population rules, their own predefined population. And therefore, right now, there's no way to produce a rate of campus crime. So we're trying to look into the feasibility of identifying populations that can be attached to these sort of zero pop or the special purpose, special district agencies, so that we'll be able to potentially produce national and local level estimates for these types of jurisdictions as well. Next slide. So in terms of our schedule, Marcus, did you want to take over at this point, or do you want me to cover this one?
Whatever you prefer. I mean, doesn't matter to me.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do this one, and then you can do the next one. Where we are at this point in time is at the highest level, we are intending to use the process that we've developed to produce national estimates for the 2021 data year that will be available using the FBI's normal production process, which is to say we are anticipating actually having national estimates using NIBRS data in the fall of 2022 that the FBI will release just like they do now. Going forward, the way we've done this is we've developed a number of different versions of the system that we're doing. We've started with an alpha version. We've reviewed that. We're going through and looking at things that might not quite work the way we thought it would. We're checking it with older data. This winter, we began to work with the FBI for how to integrate it into systems so that we know how it will work, not just in an isolated environment where we have control over absolutely every piece, but also more involving the systems. This spring, we'll produce what we're calling the beta version, which is the version that will actually be used to produce the estimates, and we'll have all of the optimizations and modifications that we've made out of all the test runs. In the spring of this year, we will update the methodology for any final agencies that have moved over between now and then, because one of the interesting things about NIBRS is we hit 2021, but that doesn't mean everybody transferred to NIBRS yet. We still have a lot of agencies that are transferring and getting data or getting more data even as we speak. And so we're going to have to keep tweaking our system to account for that. And then in the summer and the fall, we'll start disseminating information about the system with more detail, including technical information, how it works, how it differs from the current system that's in use, and sort of give people a really good idea of not just kind of what we're doing, but how they can expect to see the changes differ from what has been done in the past. And then in the fall of 2022, we'll have actual national estimates using NIBRS data for the first time since the system was created. And so we're really excited about it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Marcus, who's going to start going through the detailed stuff, and I will be monitoring chat. So if there's any questions, let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Alexia. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So this slide sort of is a summary slide that sort of will talk about what we've done in each of the key areas of the estimation project to date. And then I'm going to go into a little, throughout the rest of the presentation, I'll go into a little bit more detail. And as I said, feel free to ask questions about any of these areas as we go, or certainly at the end we can discuss them. So okay, so so first and foremost, right, the indicators. So as Alexia said, when it comes to estimation, so what people are used to, I think, is two things. One, with summary, we've been very spoiled. We've basically everyone submits summary in some form or fashion. Either they submit it as summary data or they submit NIBRS and then it's converted to summary. And with between those two things, we get about 97% of all agencies that are supposed to report actually reporting. So when you have pretty much everyone reporting, you can put out any estimate you want. There's no missing data, or there's negligible amounts of missing data that you can, as Alexia said, do 5-way crosses and feel confident that that's what the actual number is. You can do all those things. But with NIBRS, there's two things going on. One, we don't have, unfortunately, 97% of agencies reporting yet. And two, unlike summary, the whole point of NIBRS is that it's at the incident level. So there's so much more information, and you can get into such more of the weeds of each offense and incident that the cell counts can get very, very small. So we had to put a lot of thought into what should be the set of indicators that make sense from both a data quality perspective, from a substantive perspective, made sense to be able to publish initially. And believe it or not, we had to think about across all the different levels we wanted to publish it. So as Alexia said, our primary goal was national, but we know people are very interested in state, they're interested in regions, they're interested in all those different things. And so we wanted to be able to provide those things too. So when, and we'll have a lot more detail on what those indicators are in a little bit, but I'll tell you up front, at the end of the day, we're going to be publishing, or creating, I should say, I don't know if we're going to be publishing one, but we're creating about 9 or 10 million estimates. and that's not everything. That's what I'm trying to say, and that's a subset of what so that's my point, is there are millions and millions of possible estimates that could be produced through NIBRS, and so we had to cut it off somewhere, and I guess we cut it off at 10 million or something. I don't know. But we'll talk about what those are and how we get to 10 million. I mean, it's not 10 million unique things. There's different, national, states, et cetera, that get you those counts up there. But anyway, the second thing, in addition to NIBRS, something that I think some of you may know is that the LEOCA collection is also sunsetting as well, the summary LEOCA collection. And so there are two parts to that. There's the officer killed part and then the assaults part. And the FBI said they were able to get the officers killed part through another means, and they're going to continue to publish that. But the assaults part is entered, you can get that through NIBRS as well. And so they asked us to look into it, and we did. And we are able to also, in addition to the standard NIBRS stuff, able to produce an estimate for officer assault. So we're going to be doing that as well. So that's one thing that's in addition. And in addition to doing just the top line estimates and characteristics about each of them, like the part 1 crime, we're also going to be doing a deep dive into, say, drug offenses initially. And over time, I think we're going to be adding on modules for different types of offenses and really doing deeper dives. But we started with this first version of doing a real deep dive into detailed drug offenses. So that's going to be a component that we're going to include as well. So on the estimation front, there was an original plan. Some of you may know the NCSX plan. They had a sample of 400 agencies that included all the large agencies, the 72 largest, and then a sample of the rest of other agencies that hadn't transitioned yet. And that was representative of everyone. Plus, you had all those that had already transitioned to NIBRS. And so the original plan was to create some sort of blended estimate with those two sets of agencies. But life didn't quite work out the way we expected, and the time it took to get the 400 to transition took a lot longer than we expected. So we ended up having to do a different estimation approach that just takes treats everyone who is reporting as someone who reported, and then we're going to try to figure out a way to estimate to the nation from there. But there are downsides to that. That group is not, you can't necessarily assume is random, and so there's what we'll call bias, and I'll talk about that as we get into it and what that means and what the implications are on that when it comes to estimation. And as we were saying, we have 3 levels right now of geography that we're concentrating on, but national, regional, and state. And there are, again, 2 ways one could do this. You could create a single weight at the state level that rolls up to the regional, that rolls up to the national, or you could have 3 different weights, 1 for each. And we had to do the latter. The former is preferable, but we ended up having to do the latter mainly because, again, not all uniform coverage across, participation across states and regions is not uniform at the moment. And so we weren't able to create a weight from the ground and build it up right now. Maybe one day we will, but right now that's not how we were able to do it. On the quality front, quality, as Alexia said, when it's just summary data, you just have a count. There's not much to it in terms of the quality. That count is the count. But with NIBRS, there's so much information, so much detail about each incident. Some of it's filled in, some of it's not. Some of it's, the thick finger pressed the wrong, item or something, and something doesn't make sense in an incident, or when you look at it in aggregate. And so we needed to we need to look at data quality. And so another thing when it comes to whether or not we can publish an estimate is whether we think the quality of the element is good. And so we did it. We have a process by which we developed a process by which we'll do that, and we'll talk about that as well. And then there's some pieces where there's missing data where we don't want there to be missing data in order to really publish missing national estimates or estimates at all. If there is, then those estimates could be biased, and for those we do introduce imputation, and I'll talk about that, which the process by which we fill in that missing data. Then, as Alexia said, on the population estimation front, we wanted to figure out, now that we have NIBRS and we can look at characteristics of the victim, characteristics of the arrestee, characteristics of the offender, we wanted to be able to get population estimates by key demographic variables, age, sex, race, so that we could create rates by those as well, not just overall rates. And then look at zero population agencies as well. So Alexia, that's what Alexia talked about. Now I have to move this. So the biggest thing now, the other big difference here that I sort of explained, since we don't have that 97% participation at the moment, we can't just put out an estimate and say that's it with certainty. There are 100, of crime, type A out there, and just say that's the number. So because we don't have full participation, we don't know with certainty that that's the number. So we need to develop, what they do when you have a sample, when you have only a partial subset of the population, and that's a variance estimate. And so we have to create a confidence interval around that. So we'll talk about a little bit in this. We'll talk about the confidence intervals that we create. And secondly, there are going to be some confidence intervals because we have so little certainty in an estimate. They're so wide that we just can't recommend publishing it. And so that's when we suppress a particular estimate. So when I said there are 10 million estimates, that's true, but some subset of them are going to get suppressed because their data quality, their uncertainty is just too great. And so we'll need to suppress those. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then there's the system itself. So all of this is very complex. NIBRS itself is a much more complicated data file than summary. All these different moving parts and components, the weights, the population estimates, the imputation, all these things need to come together. And so we had to create a system that could contain all of these various programs and parts. And then, I need to close something. Sorry. And then put that in a system that the FBI or BJS could run that could then produce all these estimates that then could get disseminated to the public. So either through the Crime Data Explorer, through Crime in the US report that the FBI puts out annually, through various BJS reports that they're going to put out. So all those things are going to be used to disseminate these estimates at each of these various levels that we talked about. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to start by talking about coverage, because it's probably the most tangible thing that we can all think about and understand sort of what's going on. So what is coverage? So Kim talked a little bit about this yesterday or on Tuesday, but I'll go over it again. So coverage itself is a percentage of the population that can either be considered by a number of agencies or based on the population served, however you want to consider it. But either way, at the end of the day, it's what percentage of the population do we have data for, right? What percentage of the population do we have NIBRS data for? And so as a quick example, and like I said, you can look at it different ways. If you had a state with 300 agencies representing 5 million people, and 200 of those agencies have transitioned to NIBRS, and those 200 agencies represent 2 million people in the state, then coverage can be calculated 2 different ways. By agency, you have 66.7% coverage, but by population, you're only covering 40% of the population. So coverage, it does matter how you calculate it and how you consider it. We look at it both ways. Both are important from an estimation standpoint, both matter. But I just wanted to point out that it's not always, you have to be careful about what you mean by it, because the numbers can be very different depending on how you calculate it. And so why do we care about coverage on the estimation project? Well, the lower the coverage rate, the more what I call quote unquote uncertainty there is. So the way you can think about this is, if you had 100 people and you sampled 10 of them, well, you know everything about that 10, but if you're going to use that 10 to represent all 100, well, you have 90 that you don't know anything about, and you really need those 10 to represent that 90. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But there's uncertainty there, so you have to be careful. Whereas on the flip side, if you had answers from 90 of the people and didn't from 10, well, you are probably pretty sure that those 90, even if the 10 are slightly different, are gonna, whatever they said in aggregate is gonna be pretty good for all 100, because there isn't that much missing information. You're pretty certain that what that 90 said is gonna be good, cover everyone. And so, we're in the situation of sort of in the middle of those two. As we'll see, we're about 60%. And so at the moment, so there's that uncertainty there in that 40%, and we don't know. And so that matters, in terms of putting out an estimate and what we can really say that number is the actual number. And so that's at the end of the day why coverage really matters. So this is a slide that Kim showed you guys. This is going from 2018 to 2020. Coverage has improved. I expect it to improve even more. You know, with 2021, there has been a lot of transitioning over the last year, as you all know, are you all well aware of. I don't know what that number will be. It'll certainly be over 60%, but we don't have the final number. We know we are in 2022. They're still accepting data at the FBI, so we don't have that final number yet. But certainly once we do, we will update this and let you know. And what this final number is, well, do you know something, Alexia? I don't know.
Oh, no, I was just going to break in and say that, and note that this is as of 2020. So just to give a little bit of shout out to some folks that I know happen to be here, the red in California, Florida, and Alaska will not be red as of 2021. All three of those places are going to be submitting data in that. So this is just a little plug for some of my folks, since I think some of them are on the call, and I wanted to make sure that they knew we appreciated that.
Yes, very well, especially those states. Yes, we very much, from a national perspective, we very much do. Yes. So for better or worse, not all agencies are equal in the world of estimation. Larger matters, size matters. You know, obviously, you know, the largest agencies have the most crime, you know, impact coverage the most. So one thing when the NCSX project started out, they said, okay, who are the 72 largest city agencies? Who are they? Let's really try to get them transitioned by 2021. Now, of course, these largest agencies probably have the hardest time to transition. They have the biggest infrastructure because they have the most crime. They have the most systems already set up, and if they've already got a system set up one way, it's admittedly a hard challenge to totally change to be able to be NIBRS compliant. That is not an easy feat. And so you know, they're all trying, and they're, you know, and some of them were able to make it, and some just are still in that process. But they do have the largest impact on the coverage rate that I was just explaining. So where are we with them? So 40 as of last I was told, and this, as Alexia said, this is changing on a daily basis. Some of these agencies are coming through and submitting data, so this may, but I think this is still pretty accurate. 40 of the largest 72 will be able to provide all 12 months for 2021. 13 of the largest 72 will provide, you know, about half, you know, at least half a year, up to 11 months. 8 of the largest 72 will provide about 1 to 4 months, and then that leaves about 11 of the largest that just aren't quite there yet, and probably won't have any data for the 2021 year. Yeah. But that's pretty good. So that's actually pretty good. So 53, 61 out of 72 of the largest agencies having some or all data is really good, and that'll actually really help both national estimates for sure, but then obviously wherever these cities are, it'll greatly help the ability to create state estimates for those states as well. Okay, so now let's look at region. So as you can see at the regional level here too, you know, things are not equal. You know, the Northeast has the lowest coverage rate. That's largely driven by New York City has not transitioned yet. You know, certainly once that does, that'll have a big impact. Once the NYPD transitions, that'll have a huge impact on the Northeast coverage. But you can see it does vary greatly, with it being the greatest in the Midwest, slightly lower in the West, and then in the South. You know, and also pretty good Midwest and South being pretty good. And so when you see this disparity across region, that too gets at, you know, can we produce estimates equally across all of these regions, and what can we do about that? You know, when you're thinking about estimation, when you have, you know, in the Northeast, 74% missing versus only 34 or 31% missing in the Midwest and South. I mean, that's a big difference in terms of how much you have to represent in your estimate across those regions. So what are the implications here then for national estimates? So first, as I sort of said, we're, you know, not all estimates that we want to produce are going to be able to be published. You know, just because the coverage rates are low, there's going to need to be some level of suppression of some estimates. You know, we want that to be as little as possible, but just that uncertainty is going to be there. So I just want everyone to be aware that in some states or in some regions or in some nationally too, there's you may want a certain estimate representing, we just aren't there. The data isn't there to publish it yet. But over time, we fully expect that it will be. And you may see it in other states, published for other states or for other regions that you wanted to see. And so just know that, so because of this, we're going to have to suppress some estimates. But over time, those estimates will be published and will appear. And as I said, the coverage rates are not uniform across regions. I'm going to show you states in a second. I'll talk about states in a minute. But certainly across regions, they're not. And so we can't then just take an estimate that works for the nation. We'll have to break it up and create a separate weight for regions, as I mentioned earlier. And last, we sort of, as I mentioned, we abandoned the idea of the NCSX agencies themselves representing the nation along with those that have already transitioned. That just didn't play out where they transitioned at the timeline we needed to. But we were still able to develop an approach. Okay, I skipped slides. So states, moving to states. Here are the states that have 80% coverage I guess that's in 2020, I should say in 2020. And then the ones we expect to have by 2021. And 80% is just an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean, so I don't want anyone to get hung up on that number. The meaning if it's below that, we're going to suppress you. That's not what our rules are. I'll talk about those later. But 80% is a good number, meaning if we have 80% coverage in a state, we have pretty good confidence of what's going on, in any estimate from that state. So we had, as of 2020, we had 22 states. We expect at least another 8 after 2021 data comes in. We haven't seen it yet, so I can't say that with certainty, so it may be more, but we are pretty confident that we'll at least have another 8, so that's 30 out of 50 states, and plus DC, so out of 51. So what does that mean? So that means there are going to be in 2021 some states where we don't see any data. Now, I'm not saying it will be, like I said, 80% is not our rule, so I'm not saying it's 20 states we won't see. It might be something less than that, but there are going to be some states initially where they just haven't transitioned enough agencies to where we feel confident to publish something that represents that entire state. But we'll have at least 30 beginning, and over time, maybe in 2022, we'll be able to publish. We will be able to publish more, and hopefully, in the very near future. I don't know when, but we'll have all 50 states where we can produce representative estimates. Okay. So yeah, so the implications. So as I said, Alexia has already corrected a bullet on here. With California and Florida, they are expected to have data in 2021. They don't yet, but we expect that they will, and so that's good. And so as I was mentioning, we'll talk about the other factors in a second. But while coverage is not the sole factor, it's a pretty easy one for people to understand for why we can or can't publish a representative estimate. I will stop to say, just so I'm clear. Sorry, Alexa, one second. But I want to be clear. So when I say suppress, the data will still be there from those states. So all I'm saying when it comes to states and we can't publish estimates for certain states is I'm just saying we can't publish these representative estimates for the states. If someone wanted to take the data that is available for that state and produce an estimate of those that participated, that data will be there. One can do that. That's not going to change. And so I'm sorry if I went a little fast and left that little detail out. We're not taking away the data from anyone that has participated, and those agencies and their collection of those agencies from any geographic area can be published. What we're just simply saying is that, or I'm just simply saying is that we can't generalize all those agencies for every single state to say it really, we know it represents that state. Sorry, yes, Alexia.
Oh, there was just a question that came in about whether or not transitioning to NIBRS has been a matter of convincing agencies to make the transition, or whether or not it's related to the capacity to collect and send data in the right format. And generically, I'll say it's the second. There was a lot of concern when the NCSX project started that we would hear a lot of pushback because people didn't want to do it. And the reality was that hasn't been, for the most part, our experience with places transitioning. A lot more of it has to do with technical capacity and just the expense of doing it, which we've been able to help many people offset with the NCSX awards that we made and with other funding sources such as Burn Jag that people have been able to leverage. We have had a few fairly large agencies. The biggest issues that they've run into have been all technological. NIBRS is a pretty complex thing to do. You can't do it by hand. It's not like you can open Excel and tally mark it by hand like you could with Summary if you had to. And so it really requires that these agencies either have a system that's capable of pulling in those.
Okay, so we just talked about coverage. So I'm going to move on to other estimation considerations. And so the biggest, as I sort of mentioned, the biggest impact of lower coverage from what we're used to in Summary, which is basically complete coverage, is what I call uncertainty. And it really is that. I mean, I think it's a very literal. I mean, it's a statistical term, but it's also a very literal term. You can think of it literally. We are just uncertain. So so statistics can do a lot. I'm a statistician. I like to say they can do a lot. You know, but one thing statisticians can't get rid of is uncertainty, right? So there's always, you know, when you don't have an answer from everybody in the population, you're making an estimate, and you're sort of saying we think it's this based on who we have and based on, you know, how we've adjusted people to account for the people we don't have, but there's some uncertainty there. And so, you know, we have to represent that in these estimates, and I'm saying this and I'm drawing this because that's going to be a really big change, you know, as we move forward with NIBRS estimation from what people are used to with Summary. People are used to with Summary having complete coverage and just saying this is the number and that's it, or just saying we've made an estimate based on those who have reported NIBRS. So right, we only have this percentage that reported NIBRS. That's who we're talking about. We're not making a generalization to the entire population. But now that we need to account for that uncertainty, and so you're going to start seeing confidence intervals presented with the estimates. And so so for those that have seen any sort of, you know, sample survey, you know, there's a confidence interval. So we might say, you know, we think there's 100 rapes, you know, in state A, but now we're going to say, but that number could be 80 and it could be 100, between 80 and 120 with 95% confidence, you know, and you might see some range like that. And so that's what people are going to have to start getting used to, and it's something that I know, you know, hasn't existed, you know, with Summary UCR to date. And so I think that's going to be a major adjustment for folks. And so I just want to make sure everyone's prepared for that and understanding that that's what that is. And when you talk about that number 100, you can't just say it's 100. You have to really say what that range is, because that's really important. And so with NIBRS estimates, there are really two parts to that uncertainty. First is just general variance. That's the sort of the coverage. We don't have everyone. And second is bias. Normally, when you have a sample, a random sample, it's just that it's random. And that randomness means that there's no bias because you didn't pick and choose who you have. Well, with NIBRS, we sort of did pick and choose. It's those that happen to be able to transition. And there's a reason certain agencies can't transition. It is, as Alexia was just articulating, it is a technological challenge for agencies to transition. And there's something different about those agencies that are having a greater challenge than other agencies. And so that creates bias. That means the people you have don't necessarily represent those that you don't. And we have to take account for that bias as well. And in both of those cases, we're going to put them into that confidence interval range. And that measure, that now confidence interval, is based on what's called a mean squared error. That's a statistical term. You don't really need to know it, but basically what it means is that there's both a variance, your variance you would see with a random sample, and there's a bias component to it. But it's all going to get put into that confidence interval. It's all going to get baked into that confidence interval. But because there are those two components, that confidence interval might be a little bit wider, than what it would be had there been no bias, had it been a random set of agencies. So for example, had all 400 of those NCSX agencies which were a random 400 done, we would have been able to probably reduce or minimize or get rid of that bias. But we couldn't do that given the way we had to do the estimates. Okay. A little bit more detail. So the variance estimation, as I said, we'll use mean squared error. I'll probably, but the key part of this slide is really the second half, the suppression. What is the second piece of the uncertainty? There are two parts. So first, all estimates are going to have that confidence interval. So that, it doesn't matter. They're all going to have some sort of confidence interval, and we're going to have to present that when we're talking about things moving forward. But second, sometimes that confidence interval is going to be really, really big. And so when it gets to a certain point, you can't, so my example of 100, this is going to be an extreme statement here. But say you had that, oh, there are 100 rapes, but, it could have been 5 or it could have been 195 or something ridiculous, right? We can't in good faith, have the government publish that estimate. And so that estimate, when we're that uncertain about something, is going to be suppressed. And so we're coming up with rules that will suppress, certain estimates depending on that level of uncertainty. So there's something called the root mean squared error. But basically that's just the percentage of the error that the mean squared error takes up. So that's going to play a role in it. So it's basically how wide that gets at how wide that confidence interval is. The coverage rate plays a role in it. So for example, if we have a state that has over 50% of estimates suppressed, we're going to suppress that entire state. We just don't trust. That just tells us if there's a lot of estimates suppressed in an area, it's hard to trust the ones you're not suppressing. And so it just gives us uncertainty in the ones you are. And so we're going to suppress those. The one caveat to that is if coverage is really nearly complete. So if we have 100% NIBRS reporting state, even if it's very small, so like the Dakotas, for example, sometimes small states, because they're small, have small sample sizes, which sometimes lead by happenstance to large confidence intervals. We're going to say, no, hold on a second. That's a small state. It's okay. We've heard from everybody, so that is the true number. And so in those areas, we will say, no, we're not going to suppress anything, and we'll publish you. So those 100% reporting states, or near 100% reporting states, that even if they're small, sparse, low, generally speaking, low crime, relatively speaking, low crime states, we will publish those estimates and take that into account. But that's sort of the impact of this uncertainty. One, the confidence interval, and two, certain estimates will have to be suppressed just because, well, to put it, we don't have confidence in them, and so we can't put them out there. And so I didn't do that, but anyway, so as I said, we have 10 million estimates. Some subset of those, and I don't know quite yet what that number is, will need to be suppressed. So that's uncertainty. The other big area that we want to expand on now that we're in NIBRS is the population estimates. So the current population estimates produced by the FBI are good. Every agency has a population served estimate, but those population estimates do not, so they do not project population estimates below the agency level, meaning agency by race or agency by age or agency by sex. They don't have that currently. And then there are the special purpose agencies, and there's no population at all for them. And the FBI does that because they don't want to double count people. So at a university, for example, they're both in a university and they're in that area. So if you're at, I'll pick Georgia Tech in Atlanta. If you're at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, you're on the campus of Georgia Tech, so you're counted by Georgia Tech, but you're also counted by, covered by Atlanta. And so they only want to count you once. And so they count you with the general purpose agency and not the special agency. But we want to be able to produce a population with NIBRS for those zero population seats. We still won't double count people, but we'll have those populations. And then if you want to produce an estimate just for universities, you can do that. Okay. And so our plan, our proposed approach is we've been able to pull data from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and we've been able to take those agency level estimates and disaggregate them and split them out by age, sex, and race. And quite frankly, I mean, maybe that sounds easy, but it really isn't, because law enforcement agencies, for better or worse, don't know the same boundaries that the Census Bureau goes by. So you have agencies that cross county lines. You have agencies that are, multiple agencies within an area that the census collects or represents, and so we have to break those apart. And so it's not as straightforward as one might think, but we were able to do it. So we do now have agency data, population estimates by age, sex, and race, and those will be available, and we will use those to produce rates by those things as well. Okay, so let's talk about the indicators, or the crime measures, as Alexia said. So what do we mean by a key indicator, right? So we're publishing key indicators. So these are the indicators that we're prioritizing, right? So there's lots and lots and lots of estimates that one can produce in NIBRS. This is, we're starting off with just the key set. We're starting off with the key is just the initial set that we're starting with. We prioritize these. We think these are the most important ones. We think they're the ones that people want to see the most. They're also, quite frankly, the ones that the FBI publishes and BJS publishes and wants to publish. But the reason those are publishing is because those are what people want to see. And so those are the ones we've chosen. As I said, their key indicators are needed just because it's just not possible to publish everything right now. But over time, we think it will, as coverage, approaches the coverage rate that you saw under summary. If we ever do get to that, if NIBRS ever gets to that, then we probably could just publish everything under the sun, and it will be fine. We're just not there yet, but one day, hopefully, we will be. How are these indicators determined? Who came up with this? Well, we have lots of stakeholders, some of which I know were on this phone call, but across academia, obviously federal government was heavily involved, academics were involved, police agency, SAC folks were involved, and so we sort of came to some consensus. And as I said, so the set that we're starting with now is not the final set. This is a living set of indicators, and over time we will add indicators as coverage improves, and we're able to do so. So what are we producing? As I said, we are producing a lot. So I don't want to think when I say key indicators, all of a sudden we're only going to have a couple things out there. We are, well, in my mind at least, we're producing a lot. So for crimes against person, you can see we have all the stars are the part 1 offenses. So we have all of those, plus we have additional offenses. Same with crimes against property and crimes against society as well. So we'll produce estimates for each of those. And one thing I should note is that, one big change also between NIBRS and summary is that there's no hierarchy rule. Summary, when there was a multiple offense incident, they had to pick one offense type to classify that under. NIBRS doesn't have that restriction because all the offenses are listed. So we will be able to estimate each one of those offenses separately and count them separately. So within an incident, you could have multiple offense types, covered, and we'll be able to do that. And we are going to do that under NIBRS. So that's also a change. I will say the FBI is still converting to summary, so they will create a bridge so you will see how estimates would look like had the hierarchy rule been applied, but the estimates we'll produce won't have that restriction per se. So then let's talk about characteristics. So for each of those offenses that I listed, and my screen is blocked and I don't know how to minimize this. For each of those offenses listed, we will produce estimates by age, sex, and race, victim age category, victim sex by offender sex, et cetera, et cetera. We'll do those for the you'll see where the X's are. We'll do those at the victim level, and we'll do that at the, in some cases, although not all, at the arrestee level as well. So those are characteristics of the individual. At the incident level, we'll show weapon involved, injury, multiple victims, multiple offenders, victim-offender relationship, of course, location type. And for each of those, we'll produce them at different levels. So we'll produce an estimate for like weapon involved. We'll say the percentage of incidents that had a firearm. We'll also say the percentage or the number of offenses that had a firearm, or the number of victims that were involved in an incident with a firearm, and the number of arrestees. So we'll be able to present that rate at each of these levels. So when I get to just so we're clear, when I get to the 10 million numbers, that's 4 things right there. So that's 4 different estimates, even though you can the same sort of idea. So that's how we get up so high. And then you produce that at the national level, each of the regions, each of the states, etc. It sort of adds up to a lot. So moving on, more characteristics of the incident, time of day, population groupings, agency indicators. So you can see each of these different type of incident characteristics will produce as well, and these will produce just at the incident and at the offense level. But we'll produce these. So that summarizes the indicators that we're producing. Oh, the one part that's not in here, and it's not in here because we're just still finalizing it, is, like I said, the drug offenses. So we are going to do a deeper dive into drug offenses. So we'll break the drug offenses up by drug type, and we'll look at whether it was why they were arrested, property law, things like that. So there'll be a deeper dive into drug offenses too. I don't have that here today because we're just, like I said, finalizing those with the FBI and BJS. And so I didn't want to put anything here that wasn't final, but that will be done as well in terms of indicators. Let me get time to, 2:30, correct. Okay, so sorry. So data quality, we're almost done here. Data quality, obviously with all these estimates and all these things, we have to look at the quality of all these estimates. The most famous, I keep hearing everyone talk about that I'll say is, time of day, midnight, everyone puts midnight because it's just the first thing and they forget to enter the actual time of day. This huge skew at midnight. So we need to look at the data quality for each of these fields and each of these indicators to see if we think it's good or poor. And if it's poor, that's an indication there could be bias. And so, already each incident must pass a set of checks to be accepted by the FBI. So we know each incident already has gone through a certain amount of checks, but those checks are just making sure that there is a value put in. It's not checking does that value make sense? So when we look at the data in aggregate, we're able to see, well, now wait a second, this one agency had this really high number of offenses that took place at midnight. Do we really think that, relative to everybody else, do we really think that's right or not? And while for something like that, we're not going to change data because we don't know, and I'm not going to claim to know what is right or not. What we want to set up with this project, and it's great that I'm talking to you, the SAC folks here in particular, is we want to create a feedback loop, what we're calling a feedback loop. So at some point, we'll identify these agencies, we would pass that back to the FBI, who would pass it back down to the states, and hopefully, we can identify what is, if there is an issue in terms of how that agency that we identified is entering data, or maybe it's right. But if there is an issue, maybe it's a training issue and it can get corrected, you either could correct the data itself, or certainly going forward, correct that certain problem. And so that's the type of thing we want to do with this data quality. We want to create a feedback loop that then improves data quality over time. So those sorts of issues don't happen going forward. And those are the sorts of things that the FBI aren't checking for, because they're checking it at the individual incident record level. And we're looking at all of this data in aggregate and across all agencies. And so we're able to pick up on things. The other thing when it comes to data quality is there's missing or unknown data. And so when I talked about creating estimates by like age, sex, or race, well, we can put, in a NIBRS record, you can say age is unknown, right? Well, when we want to create a rate, there's no true unknown age. So we have to take that age, we have to take that record, we have to fill in an age so we can categorize it somewhere when it comes to producing a rate. And so for values like that are critical to the imputation process, we will impute, which is basically meaning filling in a value based on, an educated guess of what we have. So we'll take those one at a time, and then I'll be done. So data quality review, we're going to look at all the indicators. We're going to identify the outliers. Most of the time, we're going to identify outliers, meaning the agencies at either the 95th or 99th percentile, depending on the indicator. We'll flag those. We'll say, okay, do we think at this level, sometimes those at the 95th percentile are going to be just fine. I mean, it's just they happen to be the 95th percentile. But sometimes they're going to be problematic, and once they are, we'll institute that feedback loop that I was talking about. And so that's going to happen for each of the indicator values, each of the data elements, and we'll create that feedback loop going on. On the imputation side, as I said, we need imputation because there's missing data, and there's missing data of two types. So I mentioned one. I mentioned item, what I call it, an individual incident might have missing data for like age or sex or race. Yes, but there also is missingness at the whole level. So as I mentioned, like with the 72 largest agencies, we have some agencies that are only providing 6 to 11 months of data. Well, what do we do for the other months? We can't just assume that is all the crime, that there wasn't any crime in those other months. And so we're going to have to impute how many crimes there were in those other months. We'll use the months we have, but then for the months we don't, we'll do what's called block imputation, or fill in the number of crimes that occurred in those missing months, and then fill in all the details for the incidents that we think occurred in each of those months as well. Okay, and so this sort of just repeats. One thing I'll point out about the imputation, so in terms of who is being imputed, for victim, we feel that we can impute, age, sex, and race for everyone. For offenders, we're going to limit it to cleared cases. We're looking into imputing uncleared cases, but we know that cases that are not cleared are very different than cleared, and there isn't as much offender information about uncleared cases, because if they're uncleared, often there's missing data, and so we aren't yet imputing those cases. But then the arrestee, if you've been arrested, then we will impute it if you're arrested, but there's for some reason still missing values as well. And same within victim-offender relationship. We know that's a critical variable for folks. We want to have it as much as possible, but again, when we link victim to arrestee, we make sure when we can do that, we make sure that there's an imputed value. But if you're linked to an uncleared offender and that relationship is unknown, then we won't impute. So that is that. Okay, so with that, I think that was my last slide. Yes, so that is my last slide. So questions?
This isn't a question, but it's a comment that I wanted to bring up because it's 100% right. One of the things that we will be doing is, with regards to data quality measures, these are being shared with the FBI and they will be being written up into technical documentation. So if states want to take the same types of calculations and measures and incorporate them into their own systems of their own daily, monthly checks, that should be something we should be able to do, which should help. So yeah, that is exactly something we're hoping to do. It hasn't been done yet, but we will be sharing all of that information. One of the things about this process that we haven't really mentioned yet, but is something that sort of is a generic thing that this group might be particularly interested in, is this project, like all of the ones that BJS is engaged with, we try as much as possible to make our methodologies, our data, and even in many cases our code as public as possible. So if people want to use it, want to investigate how we did it, they can do those things. All of the procedures and processes that we've been engaged with were built on open source code. We do intend to publish very technical documentation describing all of the things that Marcus described today. And we do welcome people's thoughts and engagement, and we are intending to make as much of the process public as we can. Obviously, the FBI will have a lot of this embedded in their system, and they may do some slightly different things, but we are going to be involved in those things.
When will the technical documentation be available? We hope as soon as possible. Certainly, we want it to be available with the release of the data. So the FBI releases crime in the U.S. usually in September, and we're doing everything we can to keep that to that schedule for this year being the first NIBRS year. So it's our intention, and so it's our intention to release the documentation no later than that as well. We are hoping to release things between now and then that'll start explaining the changes that are going on. It may not be the very technical documentation, but it may be at a higher level for people to understand there is changes coming. It just sort of to prepare them for that. And so we're working on those sorts of public documents right now, as well as the technical documentation. So there'll be both. There'll be more high-level documentation explaining the changes, and then there'll be a more technical documents as well. But our goal, I don't know if hopefully we'll be able to keep this, is that all that's published, the technical stuff is published with the estimates themselves in September. Any other comments, questions? Oh, and just also to be clear, as Alexia is saying, the data that the NIBRS data as you're used to it will still be available. So for example, on the CDE, the FBI is still going to put out those that reported data, and all that will still be available. I know BJS is working on continuing the extracts for those that prefer the extracts. The difference is those will be just among reporting agencies. So it won't have the weights, it won't have the imputation. Those will be through this estimation system only at the moment. But all the data that you're used to seeing, no one's taking that away, no one's changing that in any way, shape, or form. That will still be available in the same manner that you've been used to.
One other thing I want to bring up, because we haven't really mentioned it, is sort of what this is going to look like over time. We intend this to be a living system, which is to say that the data are going to change over time. We're going to have more data. We're going to have different agencies. The quality of the data may vary every year. And so particularly in these early years, as the transition is at its height, we're expecting to stay heavily involved with making tweaks to the system, keeping up on these data quality things, and trying to make it as good and as firm a process as we can that has the highest viability and reliability that we can put into it. I bring this up in part because, the group that we're speaking to right now, JRSA and all of these constituents that you guys are a part of, we really welcome your thoughts on this. We work with what we have, we work with what we know, we can't do anything with what we don't know. And I know that particularly those of you who use these data a lot or are directly involved in collecting these data, you work with them in a way we don't. And so we frequently discover things we didn't know when we talk to you guys more. So one of the things we hope we can do over time as we continue to do these and improve this process is really get this relationship going where you guys can talk with us more if there's something you think, hey, did you take into account this issue? Or our data has this concern that we've done something with, let's talk about what might be able to be done with it. I don't think I'm overstepping from our side to say, I think we'd be very interested in talking with you guys about that in more detail and really hearing anything you guys have to say.
Yeah, and on that note, certainly, and especially I know Susan and I have talked about this, around the area of data quality and the checks that we're going to be looking at in aggregate across agencies. And if you guys want to be running those things yourselves at your state level and things, I certainly encourage that, because the sooner data quality is fixed, the better the estimates are. So I am in all favor of data quality issues being caught before data is submitted to the FBI. So we, you know, if there are any topics that's just an example, but if there are any other topics where you want a more detailed presentation from BJS or me, certainly pass that on to Susan, and we would be happy to do that in the future. And right now, you know, this is what we're able to tell you, but as we're moving, you know, we're refining these things, and we're being more certain about what it's going to be, and we'd be more open to certainly presenting what those things are. And as I was talking about, all of this will be documented. But if you guys want a presentation before that, you know, definitely let us know, and we'd be happy to come back and do another presentation.
Thanks. I see we have a question from Colleen, DCJS. With more granular data, is there a concern about revealing too much more widely about the people or victims involved in an incident?
Alexia, I'll let you, I'll start off, and then if you want to add on. So the FBI takes great care to de-identify the data. NIBRS data is considered de-identified, so there's no, so while there is more granular stuff about the incident, the other identifiers and any other sort of information like that are taken off. And so nothing in NIBRS, so we're not altering what, like I said, NIBRS as you're used to seeing it from the FBI and from or from the ICCA, ICPSR extract. You know, we're not changing that, and so those are all already deemed publicly available de-identified data. And so in that sense, no, I mean, you are right. There's a lot more about the incident, but it's been scrubbed to the point where we think the likelihood of identification is low.
That said, I do want to add to that to say that the issue that I think is being hit on, which is you might be able to identify a victim if you know that there was only one, 5-year-old male victim of this particular crime in this police department at that time. I do know that the FBI is looking into this issue and seeing what responsibilities and issues they might have that they need to address. I also say, as far as I'm aware, although we're not directly involved in this component of it, the FBI is required to get OMB approval for this collection, and data protections are part of OMB's review process. So I expect that'll be something that will get more attention to it over time as these data become more nationally representative, and a lot more people start reporting them. That said, there is 15 or 18 years of data already out there, so it's kind of an open question as to whether or not there'll be anything done on a wide scale. But that's just as an FYI, kind of what the FBI is looking at. It is a concern that they're looking at right now.
And certainly from an estimation standpoint, we do take that in mind. So there's really rare events or extremely rare, we won't, you know, that will get caught up in our suppression rules. And those estimates would probably get suppressed from our standpoint. We wouldn't publish that because, like in the example Alexia just gave, it's such a rare event. It's right, it is dangerous to publish that, so we wouldn't publish that estimate.
Other questions?
All right, I'm not seeing any more in the chat. There was so much that you covered that I'm sure people's heads are spinning. I think that right now I'd like to bring up Stephanie Howard from Georgia to just talk a little bit about what we might do going forward. Stephanie, you can turn your camera and your mic on.
Hi, everybody. So thank you all for attending and for attending even after rescheduling and all that other good stuff. It's wonderful to see so many names on the screen if I'm not seeing faces anyway. And lots of names that I recognize, so that's exciting. I kind of wanted to put in a plug. I think a lot of folks identified on the kind of registration form that Susan sent out that they would be interested in working on like a NIBRS work group with a bunch of SACs and other researchers who use NIBRS data regularly. And Derek, who is also on from the Wisconsin SAC, and I are hoping to pull together a work group of folks to just hammer through questions. You know, one thing that I think as a member of the JRSA board and as a SAC director for quite a while now, I've always been really impressed with the work that I see other statistical analysis centers do when it's presented in its final and polished form. But one of the things I'm often left thinking of is, okay, well, how do they do that? I need to know the mechanics so that I can replicate it. And that's what we're hoping that this can be. It'll be a group that is really dedicated to the mechanics. Getting down into the weeds of syntax, looking at it together. You know, Derek and Alicia in his shop saw our presentation on doing the smell test from NIBRS to summary reporting, and they identified an issue in our syntax that we were not counting certain property crimes correctly. So we hopped on a call and we looked at it together, and that's kind of what spurred this whole thing. So if you are interested in participating in something like that, we can structure it topically. If folks are doing research on gang-involved crimes, for instance, how are we measuring that? How are we classifying it? What are we looking at? What's the unit of analysis? Maybe drawing from our BJS applications, working with JRSA to identify who's using NIBRS data and what are the research questions that they've got. So we can look at stuff in a concerted effort and produce as close to consistent information and use as consistent as possible language as we can, so we don't get caught in the trap of one person is estimating one way and another person is estimating the other way, and you know, we're accused of lies, damn lies, in statistics. I don't want to be there, and I'm sure you guys don't either. Derek, did you want to add anything, since you're my co-conspirator in this?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And I'm going to refrain from sharing my camera today. I have, unfortunately, my family is completely vaccinated and boosted, but we're having a bout of COVID kind of go through the house. So I'm going to stay off camera if that's okay. But yeah, Stephanie, you're spot on. I would add to that you know, I think there's a lot of interest in ensuring that as we approach understanding NIBRS data and presenting NIBRS data to the general public, to law enforcement, to legislators, to other SACs, to universities, whatever it may be. One of the areas that I think we might be able to focus on is how to best interpret the data. So when we release a data visual of, you know, victims of crime or offenders of crime, there's multiple ways that you might interpret that data. You know, are we looking at an incident count? Are we looking at an offense count? Is it a victim offense count? Is it a pure victim count? Am I doing a count of weapons, or every time a weapon was used against a victim? Those sorts of things. And finding ways to, you know, kind of maybe develop best practices in how to present and explain data from NIBRS, I think, is an area of at least immense interest to us in Wisconsin. And I think there's value in ensuring that when we're releasing data from NIBRS and presenting it, that we can have at least some level of consistency or follow some sort of best practices, so that when Wisconsin releases you know, aggravated assaults and weapons and victimization of aggravated assaults, that same information can be interpreted similarly from other states that might be doing, you know, similar data presentations. You know, we should be measuring apples and apples. That's part of the whole FBI uniform crime reporting program, is to create standardization and standardized approaches to viewing and measuring crime and crime characteristics across the nation. And I think there's opportunity for SACs to be engaged with that and perhaps come up with a series of best practices and ideas and ways to educate the general public on how to utilize and interpret the data. It's a very convoluted system when it comes to interpreting results, and having conversations and learning from each other of, you know, some of the different interesting areas that we've run into when trying to analyze NIBRS data, and sharing that between SACs, I think is also beneficial, so that we might be able to save time or present information that will help other SACs before they uncover those same results.
Yeah, and Derek, this is Alexia. I was going to say that's part of why that kind of concern is when BJS shares, obviously, you know, how to explain what we're doing in ways that allow it to be useful to the public is kind of the cornerstone of BJS's mission. You know, it's not just enough to get the data, you also have to hand it out to the people who need it in ways they understand. So I know that we would be hugely interested in supporting something like this. And that's also part of why we're hoping to make as much of the methodology and the counting rules and the calculation procedures, if insofar as I have a better way of saying that, public on everything we're doing. And it's also part of why I assume Kim talked about this at our last one, but I'm not 100% sure because I missed it. But, you know, we're doing a lot of efforts right now to make the data more visible. We've got our new web reports that we're coming out. We're going to be doing a series of these where we are basically showing how to understand the data and how one might talk about a given chart or figure. And we're also working on a dashboard that will do similar things. But I know that I'm totally putting Kim on the spot here, but I know she would be deeply interested in talking to other people about counting rules and better ways to talk about the data and use the data and analyze it and all of those things. So I would be super excited about that, and I know the rest of our folks would as well.
That's absolutely fantastic to hear, Alexia. Yeah, we're really excited. We were just kind of making some comments of how excited we were to see and learn some of the methodologies behind your estimation project there. It's something that I think is important, and the better we educate ourselves, especially within SACs, you know, the more consistent message we can provide the general public and avoid confusion and creating uncertainty in you know, data that's being presented. So that sounds absolutely fantastic to me.
I agree with you 100%. And the other thing that I think it will help, hopefully this is my perspective, but you know, one of the hardest things is the more complex the data set gets, the harder it is to get the public to buy in on its validity. You get so much black box that any issue or error suddenly infects the entire database, right? If we can't trust this one number that came out and we don't know how you made it, how can we trust everything else? And so I really do hope that, you know, as we make this stuff more public and the more public we can be with our methodologies and processes and procedures, the more we can get people to support the data, to believe in the data and trust what we're putting out. That's not to say there aren't going to be errors. There are always errors in things. That's the nature of the beast. But by making these public and sort of opening the box, as it were, it's my hope that it encourages people to look for those, come to us, we can fix them, and then make it even better. You know, so that I'm going to put that out there as a, you know, if I have any closing thought for you guys, you know, please pull the cover off, you know, dig in there, tell us what you think is wrong or what isn't working, because, you know, as the Federal Statistical Agency, the Department of Justice, it's not enough to collect data if it's not things that are useful. If it's not needed or understandable, it's kind of a pointless thing to get. You know, so I know that, you know, one of our goals is very much to make these as useful and as straightforward as we can. So please hit us up on these kind of things.
And I guess by way of closing the loop on the discussion, one of the things that when Derek and I spoke about starting the NIBRS work group is Derek, I don't remember what the thing is, vice chair of the APB process on NIBRS for the FBI. I don't know. He's got some like direct line to the man, and when changes are made, he has some input. And so as statistical analysis centers who analyze these data and are tasked with providing intelligence, if you will, of a policy nature to our states, our fellow law enforcement entities, that if there are either innovative collections that are happening in your state or burning policy issues that are happening in your state that may be applicable to other states, that is an opportunity for us to come together and flag them so that we can make comments on or provide input on that APB process through Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I chair the FBI's UCR subcommittee, and that actually has some representation by BJS as well. And historically, and I guess in the past few years, there's been lots of work, effort, and discussions related to improving and kind of eyeing the improvements for the future of NIBRS. And I think as NIBRS data starts rolling out, one of the areas that will become of increasing importance is how to display and explain or educate about NIBRS data. And I thought, this is a really great opportunity to have and build some perspective from, nationally from SACS, and express or have an opportunity to express what those perceptions are to this national committee that really kind of steers the direction of NIBRS, or I should say provides recommendations to the FBI on how to steer the direction for NIBRS. So yeah, I think Stephanie's spot on. It's a great opportunity to engage, learn from each other, identify or perhaps develop best practices, and explain and share those at the national stage, so that we can have some consistency and standardization in how NIBRS data is presented and understood.
Great. Well, I think these two sessions have been a terrific start to this effort. I want to thank our BJS presenters and Marcus from RTI for helping us kind of all get on the same page as far as what's happening at the national level with all this data, and start thinking about the different issues that folks at the state level or local level can start wrestling with. Stephanie and Derek and I will get together and figure out next steps for those who do want to be involved. We have the list of people who said, yep, sign me up, and the list of people who said, let me know the information so I can pass it along. Well, and if you're not sure, go ahead and email me. That's Showley, SHOWLEY, @jrsa.org, and we'll add you to that list. So I see we're 3 minutes over. Thanks everybody for sticking around. And Alexia and Marcus, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having us. It's always an honor and a privilege. And, like any math heads, we're excited to talk about this kind of work with other people who appreciate it. So anytime, and we appreciate and look forward to hearing from you guys.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yes.
All right, thanks. Goodbye, everyone.